Good afternoon. We're live here at Italian Roots and Genealogy. I'm special host Phil Apollo here with the main host, Bob Sorrentino. We're here to ask Bob a couple questions. Say, hey, how are you doing today, Bob?
I'm doing great, Phil. Thanks a lot for doing the interview.
Oh, you're welcome. No problem. Anytime. We're here to discuss a book you wrote, Farmers and Nobles. Can you enlighten us and tell us why you specifically titled the book Farmers and Nobles?
Yeah, sure. So it's based on my two Italian families, my grandparents that both came from Italy. And my mom's family were farmers from Toritto, Bari. And my dad's family, his father rather, was from I guess, a gentrified family. They were lawyers and pharmacists. And my grandmother was from two noble families.
How did your parents?
Eventually, they both wound up in Corona, Queens. And I'm not exactly sure, when and how they met, but both families found their way there. There was an Italian enclave back in Queens in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And like, I guess, virtually all the Italians in Corona, Queens, they got married at St. Leo's. And that was the mainstay growing up, was Corona, Queens. And if you know the King of Queens, and there's a shot where he walks away from the lemon ice king and the ice falls on the floor.
Yeah.
That was about 5 blocks from my grandmother's house.
Oh wow, real close. That's a pretty little interesting tidbit.
Yeah.
Your parents then met here in the USA. How about your father's parents? Did they meet here in the USA or did they meet back home in Italy? Because you mentioned how your father's male line was from a gentrified line and your mother's line was from two noble families. So I'm curious to know as how did they just meet here by chance or was it something arranged?
My father's parents were, one side was gentrified and my grandmother was from the noble families. And I always heard the story growing up, quite funny story, that my grandfather would say that he was in seminary studying to be a priest. And he would say that my grandmother would pass the seminary and flirt with him. I found out years later from my second cousin, whose mom was very close to my grandmother growing up because she was the oldest granddaughter. She said that my grandmother was in her fancy schmancy carriage one day, and it broke down in front of the seminary. My grandfather was outside. He helped repair the carriage, and that was it. If the carriage didn't break down, I wouldn't be here.
Oh wow, that's a very interesting story. Sometimes you got to think, mechanical failures or things like that just happen and just brings people together, and just creates just the best stories.
Yeah, no, that's a funny story. Now, on the converse, and that's why we come up with the farmers and nobles. My mom's family, they were farmers from Toritto as far back as anybody knows.
Okay, so you mentioned as far back as anyone knows. Now, did you do any sort of tracing on the side of the family that was farmers, whether tracing here in the United States or tracing all the way back into Italy?
Yeah, so I was able to trace back, and surprisingly, the Antonati, Toritto has thousands of records on the Antonati. I was very surprised by that because it's such a small place. And so I was able to get back several generations back to, I guess, the earliest birth date was around 1750, something like that. So, and I've probably gathered over 150 records of, great aunts, great uncles, grandparents, cousins, and things like that.
Now, do you have any any interesting stories in particular to share with us about your family on your mom's side of the family back in Italy or even here in the United States?
Well, back in Italy, there are two stories that I have. One is in the book, and it's quite a nice story that before my oldest uncle passed away, my cousin recorded him in Bari. And he didn't leave Italy with his family until 1950. So he gives the whole account from the earliest he remembers through World War II and coming here. My great grandfather, he owned a cow. They actually owned their house, which is surprising in that they owned the house. But he owned a cow, and he was apparently the village milkman. He would walk through the village with my uncle, and if you wanted milk, he'd stop in front of the door and fill up a pail, and that's how they got the milk. And I also have the story from my oldest cousin, from my uncle Giovanni, and she was probably about, I guess, about 8 or 9 when World War II broke out. So she tells a story of what it was like during the war, and she actually remembered my great grandfather. So it's a bit of history, and again, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. People need to get these stories, write them down, whether they publish them or not. That's up to them. But they need to save these stories for future generations.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Especially when you have a firsthand account of, like, war, people going through like hard times such as, war or, even economic downturns or things like that. It's important to have that information just so we can understand what went on in their daily life, whether it's our connection to our past and our particular family and the struggles that they faced along the way, or just, the struggles of, any people, in particular, without any particularity.
Yeah, and that's what was so interesting about getting these stories. And my uncle actually didn't have to serve in World War II because by that time I think he had 3 children, so he was exempt. He was in the service before, and when he came back, that's when he married my aunt. But again, he didn't have to serve, so that was pretty interesting to know also.
Yeah, that is interesting. I didn't know they gave exemptions during the war when people had that many kids. That's yeah, because I thought it was like how America was, where they were just drafting people left and right into the war and just not taking into account whether or not the father was going to end up leaving his children without a dad, and if he were to pass away in war or not. So that's a little different to hear and to read and come across.
Yeah, and in fact, I learned recently that if you had, I think it was the third child, if you were away, like let's say this person was in Albania, they if you had that third child, they would actually send you back home.
Oh wow, that's actually really interesting. So you could have had two, but your wife was so many months pregnant. You got sent off to war, and then you got called back. Wow, did that happen to anyone in like your family in particular? Did you just come across that through coming across your research on your family?
Not that I know of. This came across with an interview that I did with somebody else who told me that.
Is the interview on the blog?
Yes, it is. It was, I think, the last one that I did.
Let's talk about your dad's side of the family again. And you mentioned that his male line, Sorrentino, they were a gentrified family, and like you said, they were lawyers and pharmacists. Can you give us a little discussion or little interesting tidbits that you found along your way about that family when you performed the research on them?
Yeah, sure. So I was having the toughest time finding the Sorrentino side. I just had a roadblock, and I eventually hired somebody in Italy to help me do the research. And the interesting part of that story, again, I'm a firm believer in fate and karma. I hadn't heard, he had sent me some stuff on my grandmother's family, nothing on my father's family. About a year went by. I hadn't heard anything. And in fact, I was just going to go back and say, hey, what happened? And my cousin who lived with my grandparents passed away. And she was kind of my go-to person with some of the research. And 2 days later, I got this data dump from Italy with the Sorrentino family. Coincidence? Maybe. I don't think so. That's when I found out that they were lawyers. And there was one record that he passed me, which was, it wasn't a wedding vow or banns per se. It seemed to be like almost like a contract or a sort of a prenup that was like 34 pages long because her father was a lawyer. He had everything in this thing from the kitchen sink, even strange things like he was never in the army. Why that made a difference, I have no idea. So that was very, very interesting to find. With my grandmother's side, her mother and father, I did have some records. He sent me some more and was able to confirm what I thought I knew. And also with the help of some of the cousins that I found over there, I was able to put a piece together a pretty good picture of that family, the Piromallo and the Crocolo family. And I always tell people that you can't give up. You'll find the strangest things in the strangest places. And when I first put in my great grandfather's name, Nicola Piromallo, what popped up was a record from the Libro d'Oro for Crocolo. I had never heard that name before, and that's when I went to my cousin Louise, and I said, "Have you heard this name?" And she says, "Of course, that was Grandma's mother." I said, "Did you know how famous they were?" She said, "Oh, she used to tell us that her cousin was the princess, but we just thought she was a batty old lady and didn't." But it was true; she was the princess.
Oh, I mean, it's such a lovely like story that you were able to actually connect the dots fully, and like even connect with your family back in Italy. After so many years of having the suspicion.
Well, yeah, and I never knew these people existed. I never knew anybody was there. No one ever really talked about the family in Italy.
I bet like that was kind of like shocking when you first like came across them, but at the same time it was like you had to know someone was there, but you never know who they necessarily are.
Well, yeah, and the only inkling of having family there that I knew was my dad told me, oh, probably, I don't know, 30, 35 years ago, that he had family in Torre del Greco. Never said who, never said anything. And 2 months before we left on the trip, I got contacted by my dad's first cousin, who's actually younger than me. That's a whole story in the book in itself. And he said, "You're coming. I'm going to meet you at the cemetery, and I'm going to take you to my my aunt's house." They were my father's first cousins. Never knew, never had an idea.
That's awesome, especially because like the whole situation with him being a younger first cousin just makes it like a younger first cousin of your father's just makes it all the more interesting. I see you put the calling card up on the screen. This was the card that you received from your grandmother, right?
That's what started everything. Yeah, my grandmother brought this card from Italy. When she came in, I guess 1915 or something like that. In fact, I think she brought a whole box of them because my cousins have some. And yeah, that's what pretty much started it all. But I just wanted to flip to my dad's family in Torre del Greco. The woman in the center is my father's first cousin from my grandmother's youngest brother. And she bears a, pretty good resemblance to my grandmother. Not an exact match, but pretty good resemblance.
That had to be a like almost like a wild like blast from the past, or like a deja use of sort. You know what I mean? Like looking at her and remembering how your grandmother looked and seeing how similar they look.
Well, yeah, and the crazy part of it is they started taking out pictures. They took out my parents' wedding picture with my grandmother's handwriting on the back of the photo. Just blew me away. And again, that's why I tell people, it's great if you're planning a trip to Italy. If you go to Rome, you go to Florence, you go to all of those places, it's a wonderful trip and everything. But if you have any idea where your family is from and you go to that town, I've heard stories where people will be in this town and they would either mention their name or they would see somebody that looked like their grandfather or their uncle, and they would say something. They would say, "Oh, sure, we know who that is," and they would bring them. They bring them to their houses. It's incredible. It's just too hard to explain unless you actually do it.
It sounds amazing because it sounds so like homely and personal, personal, that as opposed to like going to these major cities that are tourist areas, you just kind of feel like another number. You know what I mean? Like you're just tourist number 10 or whatever that came through the building this day. As opposed to being the grandson of so and so or the great grandson of so and the people having some sort of memory of this person in their town.
We'll be right back.
Experience Italy like never before, traveling with a scheduled group or create your own bespoke tour with friends with philitaly.com. Pack your bags and follow Phil. That's www.philitaly.co.
Well, yeah, exactly. And especially when you meet your family and they have photos and everything. And right after we got back, a little while after we got back, Nicola sent me photographs that my grandmother sent 100 years ago to her father, that his mother actually saved. And that's the back cover of the book. Again, it's too hard to believe. And we originally were supposed to go on the trip. Yeah, that's it. We were originally supposed to go on the trip, 2.5 years ago. And had we gone at that time, COVID had hit. We had to postpone it a couple of times. I never would have met Nicola, never would have met the family, never would have known any of this. So things happen for strange reasons and strange ways.
I absolutely agree that things, they always happen for a reason, and for whatever that reason is, it's always to, it always works out for the best. You know what I mean? Like, so the fact that, yeah, sure, it was, not the greatest that you had to wait 2.5 years to go back to Italy, but and on the bright side of things, like you said, you wouldn't have met these family members and been able to have this interaction with them back in Italy. Now, you mentioned the Carciolo family and the Piromallo family. What other noble families do you descend from? Maybe ones that we might particularly know through pop culture, like say like the television show The Borgias, or even I'm trying to think of other shows that depict the De Medicis. That show, that was the other show I was thinking of. The show with Leonardo, and as well as the show with Leonardo da Vinci that covers the Medicis and into the Borgias as well. Are you related to any family like that, or?
Yeah, there's probably about 30 or 35 families that I go through in the book. And that was another reason why I wanted to do this, because we've heard so much throughout the years, and there's shows about the British royal family and the Spanish royal families and the French royal families, noble families, but not much about the Italians. And there's a rich history for 1,000 years of Italian nobility, Italian royalty, how the kingdoms were all split up. And one family in particular that I had never really known about was, and their crest is on the screen now, the D'Este family. I had never heard of Isabella D'Este. And she was married to Francesco Gonzaga, who was, and this is highlighted in the Borgias, he was the lover of, or one of the lovers of Lucrezia Borgia. And they didn't treat her very nicely on that show. They didn't treat her good at all, unfortunately. But I refer to her, she was like the Jackie Kennedy of the Renaissance. She was into all the arts. She had all of these, the famous painters come. And her story is just incredible. And in fact, she was so good that when her husband was off either fooling around with Lucrezia or fighting a war someplace, she was running the duchy, and a very beautiful woman, but also very intelligent, and quite a real person. Some of the other families that are in the book are the Colonnas, very famous family. Orsini's, again, another family. The Lascalas, uh, another big family. The Aragones, who were Spanish, and I put them in there, not because they were Spanish or anything else, or not Italian, but because they were so prominent in Naples for so many years. And they're mentioned a lot in the Borgias. And there's quite an interesting story about King Ferrante that's in the book. And it's also in the Borgias. He was quite a guy. He believed in keeping his enemies close. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, yeah. Let's not spoil it for the readers or anyone that is interested in watching the Borgia show. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's it's a very interesting way to treat your enemies after they, I guess we'll say, expired. Um, I wanted to walk it back a bit. We were discussing the De Este family. Where do they? Do you know where they originate from? In terms
Well,
of
yeah, they were from the north. I get my towns confused. I don't remember if she was Mantua before she was married to Gonzaga or when, but they were both the Gonzagas and the Dieste families were very prominent in the north.
the reason why is because I've never seen their like a page or a link for them on the Nobili Napolitano, which highlights a lot of the noble families in the South. So I was just interested on where they came from, and I'm sure that others that are fans of the show, the Borgias, or if they're going to watch the show, they might want a little background information as well as anyone interested in purchasing the book. Do you have any interesting stories on any of these families in particular that you would like to share outside of the story you shared earlier about the Dieste woman?
There's so many. I think the important thing to know is that there were so many of these families, whether they were very very high class nobility like the Caracciolos or D'Este or Gonzaga, or some of the the less known ones that owned the town. But there was just so much infighting among these areas in Italy. Uh, it was not a stable place for hundreds and hundreds of years. And who was poisoning who, and who was murdering the other one, and who was buying this town, and all of these intermarriages. It's quite an interesting story because unlike I think England and France, these duchies and counties and marquisates, they weren't stable.
I'm sure their instability contributed to, like you said, all of the aforementioned things, the wars, the intrigue, and stuff like that.
And then
Now,
throw the Pope in there too,
yeah.
and it's even more confusing.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Because then the Pope, because he, the Pope likes this individual's family more. He recognizes
Yeah.
this individual's claim more than another's claim. That's what the whole Great Italian War saga was over. It was one king. It was the Spanish king after the French king after the Spanish took Naples wanted to retake Naples for his domain, and I think it was the Borgia Pope at first sided with the French and then turned his back and sided with the Spanish or something like that, and it created like a whole like just big mess of problems that lasted for like 80 years or something like that. The Great Italian Wars went from like the 1490s to like almost the 1570s. So, I mean, wow, quite a little mix up. Mix the Pope in it. It creates a lot of drama, I should say. Italy recently. Can you give us a little bit of a rundown on how that experience was for you?
Yeah, sure. It was certainly a trip of a lifetime. We had contracted with Letizia Sinisi from Italy Routing, who did just a fantastic job in setting the whole trip up. And it was kind of pretty much of a whirlwind because we hit 5 regions. We were planning on 6, but we had to put Puglia off for a while. But every place was different, and we went to ancestral homes in Molise and Avellino and Calabria, and then also my wife's mom is from Shaka, so we visited Sicily too, and it was just incredible experience, mainly because of the people. The people really, really appreciate us going back there to our hometowns and wanting to be part of the culture. Their history is so rich; they don't forget anything. That was one of the amazing things when we went to the picture behind me, the Palazzo in Avellino. I asked them. I said, "Why do they hold these Caracciolo families in such reverence? The princes going back to 1600, 1700." And they explained to me that they were good to the people, that they brought industry, they helped them with the land. They, for the most part, there was, of course, there were bad nobles too, but for the most part, they were the government. They were the people that did everything, I guess, from justice to industry to farming to you name it. And they still revere these people. And it was incredible to me. It was like when we walked through that little door there were people in costumes, and we walk in, and they were blowing the trumpet like the queen was coming or something. It was like I'm standing there like a doofus trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do.
I take it you had a great time on your trip, and like you said, your favorite part of the trip was going to these individual towns and interacting with these with the people, your family, as well as the people from the area. Is this what motivated you to write this book, or did you have motivation to write the book prior to your trip to Italy?
I did. I had the motivation to do it before the trip, and in fact, I was almost going to. I was almost positive we weren't ever going to make this trip, but we did, and so I held off to finishing the book until we got back. But yeah, it was always in my mind to do it for a couple of reasons. One is I want to have people see what I've done so that they do the same thing, specifically when it comes to whether it's your Italian American family here with stories, or stories from Italy, or finding the family in Italy. The second reason is some of the stories that I've heard from my interviews are just so incredible. How things happen, how things just kind of pop up. And then finally, there's a little bit of a primer in there at the back of the book, just kind of explaining how to navigate the Antonati and some links to use to find your Italian family.
What was your then motive to write the book outside of people wanting to potentially do the same thing? Did you feel like it was necessary for you to put out your story because it was so unique and particular?
I wouldn't say because it was so unique and particular. I think it was more from the noble side of the family to get people to be in touch with the rich. I love history, so to have people get in touch with the rich history of Italy outside of the stupid stuff we see on TV all the time.
Yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from with that, especially considering that a lot of times in pop culture, Italians and Italy in general is not depicted in the greatest light, I would say. Especially with people making fun of Italians with the hand gestures and being dramatic. So it's a good thing to spread a positive image about the Italian culture. Now, are you working on anything else? Any projects, books, or any with any organizations to better the Italian American community?
Nothing in particular with the Italian American community per se. I was hoping to do something with my friend Anthony, passed away last January. And he's got a fantastic book out about all the interviews he did back in the 70s. As you know, you and I are working on a book about Calabrian nobles and those some 130 families, noble families just in Calabria alone.
Yeah, it's a lot of families to go through, and the stories so far have been very very interesting, and a lot of them have been in depth. A lot of these families have a lot of history and records kept on them. I don't want to spoil too much for the viewers out there, but I mean it goes back from the Roman times all the way to the Bourbons. So that's like 1850 years of history.
Well, yeah, and another good book, although it's just in Italian right now, is from Nicola Mastronati, who we met there, and he's an expert on the Samnite Nation. Again, I had never heard of these people, and I heard about it before, but then they took us to the ruins over there, and they predated the Romans and actually fought the Romans for years and years and years. It's quite an interesting story, and he said, I asked him, why are you interested in this? And he said, well, my family's been here for 1,000 years or more, so they're my history. So that's very interesting when you start digging into even before the rest of Europe got there, when the Romans got there, there were these very, very intelligent tribes, warrior tribes that were in Italy going back to 3000 BC.
Yeah, because before the Romans in the north there was the Etruscans, and the Samnite, if I recall correctly from learning in history classes, they were mainly located in like the Campania, Caserta, and just like to the east of the northern portion of southern Italy.
Yeah, they stretch from like the upper part of Calabria up through Puglia and Molise, and then there's not quite into Rome. But again, the Romans wanted their territory, so that's what caused all the infighting.
Yeah, I believe they had like a couple wars with the Romans, right?
Yeah.
It's very interesting stuff, because I know that to the south, the Romans used to call it Magna Graecia, which stands for Greater Greece, because of how much the Greek colonization really shaped the south of Italy.
Exactly. I just put up a little bit of an eye chart there, which is, I want to put this up there more, well, for a couple of reasons. One is it's a great chart that was done by Kai White, who's a West Point graduate and an expert on the Crusades. He's wrote several books about the Crusades, and he also makes these fantastic charts. And I just wanted to say that I get asked all the time a couple of things. One is, well, everybody says they're from nobility, and how do you know? The second thing is, everybody's related to nobility, which is true. Everybody is. Pretty much everybody alive today could probably trace their path back, but it's hard to find. It's hard to figure out. If you're from English descent or Scottish descent or Irish descent in America, it's not so hard because the documentation is so good. And if you could trace yourself back to a gateway ancestor, you could find your way back to most of the nobility or royal families in England. It's really not that difficult. When I approached Kai and I said, these are my Caracciolo ancestors, can you do a chart for me? He said, well, I don't know. I'll have to check. And he came back, and once he found out one of my great-great-great-grandfathers, Ambrosio Caracciolo, he said, yeah, I could do the chart. The thing is, when you're doing your research, don't take anything for granted, first of all. Second of all, look for obscure things, because you never know what you're going to find. And then finally, go to the hometowns. A lot of them have Facebook pages, or if you have a name go out to that hometown, search on the name. You never know, who you're going to pick up on. And even in the United States, I was able to go back to newspapers in New Jersey back in the 20s, and I found things about Italy in those papers from my family. Somebody passed away, and it was in the paper in New Jersey.
That's extremely wild. You have that in the book, right? You included that in the book?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I remember seeing that when I went through the book. I forgot to ask you a question on that when we were discussing, more so the contents of the book. You stated that almost everyone has European nobility ancestry, but it's very tough to find the connection, unless if for particularly for Italian Americans, it's harder because we don't have the records going back so long in America to a gateway ancestor in England. So, what do you suggest? Do you suggest looking back through the Avenatti and I can't remember the other thing that was like the town records?
Well, yeah, the Antonati, I mean, church records are tough to get, but uh, for people who think they may have nobility, and of course we know that you have some too, but is go to Nobility of Naples website and the Libro di Oro. And if you could find a connection there, it just opens up a whole world that you would never know. I've talked to people who have been able to find, again, similar to me. They may have had an artifact. They may have had a letter, or they may have found something in a Bible with a name, and they started their research and they were able to find it. One thing that I do caution people about is when you search these places online that, say, send us your name and we'll send you a coat of arms. It's baloney, so don't do that.
Yeah, they're just in the business of making money. They're not really in the business of performing any sort of accurate genealogical research.
Yeah, if anybody has a question, you could just put a comment on, and I could put it up there on the screen.
Okay, well, I had a question. I didn't ask during our interview because I wanted to wait and save it. I noticed that when you were discussing the family that got your Sorrentino line that married the lawyer in the lengthy marriage contract. They married to the Longo. Her last name was Longo. Is that potentially the Longo family that was like lower nobility in the Naples region?
Possible, but again, I haven't been able to make that connection. So I never jump to conclusions.
Yeah.
I really want to have the hard evidence. And, I was lucky in respect to the Piromallo family that I was able to find my great grandfather's birth record and his father's record going back. Yeah, this is just a little post from Ben Luigia. Not every surname has a coat of arms, so beware those vendors in the mail for sure. And technically, the coat of arms really only belongs to one person. It's not necessarily the whole family who has it. It's really the heir to that particular title that really gets to use it. In my grandfather's case, my great grandfather's case, it says from the Dukes of Capricotta. So it doesn't say that he's got any titles or anything like that.
Yeah, and some grants, when the king would grant the titles, they would be only for the primogenitor. So it would go only to the firstborn male. Sometimes the coat of arms would be granted to the whole, to any heirs of the
That's right. Yeah.
individual. So then the entire family was able to use it.
Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. And I've come across a couple of those in the family that it says in perpetuity, everybody who has that name can use that title. Phil, do you know about the nobility in Piemonte?
I do not know about any of the nobility in Piemonte. I would say that probably the best way of going about like searching for the nobility in Piemonte would be just go into a Google search, and I would start off with just typing nobility of Piemonte in quotations, and then work from there. Yeah. Oh, that. Yeah, you could type in the surname Di Piemonte, and if the family was like notable, stuff will start popping up. Like, say for instance, my family is Scapani. When I typed in Scapani di Zagaris, I got a couple of web pages that popped up. I got something that popped up about a prosecutor from like the 1580s. Another page about um, a I think it was lieutenant, or it was uh, like a military officer or something like that. I'm not too sure exactly, but when it translated to English, it said lieutenant. In the 1600s, living in Zagatis, and then I found a mayor from records in the 1700s, and then a notary in the 1800s. Just by typing in the last name and then the area from there.
Right, and also, go to the Libro di Oro, because they have all the noble families from Italy on there. They don't have the tree for everybody, but it's quite possible it's there.
Yeah, and even if they don't have the tree, they'll have some sort of summary about the family and their origins, whether it's the first person that obtained the title or it's where the family transplanted from, whether it's from like how Bob's family, the Piromallos, came from Spain in the 1500s when the Spanish Empire was controlling the south of Italy.
Yeah, and that goes back. I found the Caracciolo ancestors back in the 950 on there. It was just kept going back and back and back. I consider myself extremely, extremely lucky that my grandmother brought that card from Italy, because I never would have had a clue as to any of this. So again, go through all the old artifacts, old letters, even if there's a story that you don't believe, see if you can follow up on it.
That was exactly my case. I didn't believe my grandmother at all when she told me that her family were nobles, and both sides of the families were nobles. I didn't believe it at all. Just because like I don't live in some super wealthy crazy mansion or or anything like that. So I was like, no way, Grandma. Like this can't be true. But as I kept, once I actually started doing the family tree, and then I got back about like 3 generations, and I started, finding things like, oh, this guy was a doctor, this guy was a lawyer, mayor of a town, like, and then, you start doing more and more research, and you keep going back more and more, and it starts leading you to larger nobles, and then even, larger and larger nobility as you keep going down the line. Or sometimes families would ascend too, which that was a lot harder to do during the days of feudalism than it is now. That's what it was, the American dream. Like, all of our Italian ancestors, for us Italian Americans, came here as well as other parts of the world, was to really better yourself and your kids.
Right, and Phil and I do have a Facebook group um, dedicated to descendants of Italian nobility. So you could always go on that Facebook group and ask us or ask somebody else in the group. I think there's about 250 people in the group right now, so that's certainly a good place to start too.
Yeah, I actually believe that there's a few. I don't want to say 100%, but I believe there's a few nobles from northern Italy in the group, right, Bob?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
So they would be way better people to ask about anything to do with the north than Bob or I, because both of our families are from the south. I know Bob has some family that came from the north and to the south more recently than my family did. So, but both of our families really come from the south. That's where our roots are. I mean, that's where they migrated from Italy to America.
Yeah, and then another interesting fact about the southern Italians was that the nobles all lived in Naples. I thought they lived where their towns, but they didn't. They would go visit there once or twice a year. But they spent their lives in Naples and
Yeah,
collected taxes. Collected taxes. That's what they did for a living. They collected taxes.
they would go to their demands to collect their taxes, and then they would go back to a lot of them would live in, if they didn't live in palacios in Naples, they lived in apartments inside of these palacios, because these palacios are so massive. They got 20 rooms in them, so they might own a section of it where it's like 5 bedrooms.
And as recent as the mid 1800s, my grandmother's Piromallo family, they had at least 6 palazzos that I know of. So just recently, my cousin Cinzia found one in Messina, where her great grandfather was born. So these people, they were very wealthy. Unfortunately, we ain't.
Yeah, very very unfortunate. But hey,
But wouldn't you like to at least drop in once in a while and look
yeah,
look from the sky and see how they lived? It
right,
had to be very interesting.
right. Now you were unable to visit the Palacio in Messina because she didn't discover it yet until after you left, right?
Yeah, we were 3 blocks away waiting. We were at the ferry pier, 3 blocks away, and I didn't know it was there.
Yeah. Oh man, that reminds me of from a prior discussion we've had. I don't know if this was on one of the blog posts or if it was just when we got together and discussed it. You told me about how last time you were in Italy before the most recent time this year, you were like 2 blocks away from where all your Carciola ancestors lived, and you didn't even know it. You didn't even know
No.
that they were your ancestors and that there was their place and all those things. So it was like another one of those experiences for you. Now you have another reason to head back to Italy because you have some more things to visit.
Yeah, and where I'm working with Letizia to see if we could come up with some kind of way so that for people who may not know the hometowns that they're from, they may know they're from Calabria or Sicily, is to try and come up with a way to have a trip that brings you back in time, similar to what I did, um, so that you could experience just I can't say it enough, the wonderful, lovely people there who are so excited to see us. Well, Greg, that's a good question. So I'll tell you, I'll tell you 2 things. Um, the people in Avellino were the ones that told me when I asked, why do they still celebrate um, these nobles? And they're the ones who explained to me that they were good to the people. They brought industry. They brought farming. Um, they celebrated with them. They built the churches. They upkept the churches. Most of them spent a lot of money. I think for the most part, it was the rule, but there were some, especially in my family, there were some pretty cool ones if you go through the list. Um, but I'll tell you one story that they told me when we were there, and it was one of the Piromallo homes in Massa di Soma that they said I had to see. And we got there, and I had the crest and all of that. And they brought us into this courtyard, and they said, "Look up at the second floor balcony." And I said, "Okay." And they said, "The uh, the I guess he was I think he was a count. He was a count. He on his birthday, he would roast a pig. He would hand out wine and get the people drunk, and then throw money out the window for sport to watch them fight." Not one of the more pleasant stories that you want to hear about your third great grandfather, but so that's an instance of where maybe he wasn't so nice all the time.
It's not a flattering story, but you know it. History isn't always flattering, and neither is family history. So you take the good with the bad. But as for a rule of being a part of being noble was like treating those that were the lesser class with humility and respect. It's about, it's about being kind and being like noble in your being, and that's really what like a lot of nobles aim to be like. But of course, a lot of history is recorded about whether it's on an extreme end of someone being very good or very bad. A lot of the people that fell in between, they weren't really left in for the history books to record, and there's a reason why is because they were just kind of going with the status quo.
Yeah, and when we were leaving Avellino, I said to Letizia, I said, that was pretty amazing. And she said, if you think they treated you like royalty in Avellino, wait until you get to Montebello. They're going to treat you like God. And they did. They, the, the people were just amazing. And um, they, I said it before, they have this rich history that they're not going to let go by the wayside. They just won't. The churches in the smallest towns are immaculate, beautiful, well kept, flowers. When we were in the square Montebello, and they were doing some entertaining and singing and dancing and things, and the florist came out from there was a florist shop in the town, and he gave my wife a bouquet of roses painted in the colors of the Piromallo coat of arms, blue and gold. And I said to Letizia, I said, boy, that was so nice. And she said, that wasn't part of the plan. He just heard that you were here from America and you were descendant from the Piromallo family, and he wanted to do that. And this wasn't a cheap bouquet of flowers either. These were beautiful roses. That's just the way they are. Just the way they are.
It's absolutely beautiful that he did that for your wife, and he took the time to arrange in the color of your family's crest. Like, wow. Like,
Yeah.
Honestly, like I'm from like a smaller town in America, and like as my town grew, the community kind of like the community feel kind of dissipated a bit, and that's like something like when I first moved into my hometown, like that's something like that happened when the town was like 5,000-6,000 people big, you know.
And it's not just because you're from a noble family. They do it for everybody. I'll tell you, one quick story just from an interview, the last interview I did with Robert Fumo. He's been to Italy like some 30 times, and he's from a small town, Cogliano, and he was there, and he was in a bar, and he saw older gentleman drinking a spritz, and he had never seen it before because it's like an orangey color. So he asked an Italian, what's that? And the person thought he was asking about the drink, but the person thought he was asking about the person. So he said, well, that's Ernesto Fumo. He says, well, I'm Fumo. So he said, I went over to him and I said, I'm Roberto Fumo. And he said, I know, I'm your uncle. Just like that. And he said he just kept playing his cards like it was nothing. And then he said his next trip over, he actually got to spend some time with him. And that's just the way they are. It was just so much, yeah, I know who you are. I'm your uncle.
You gotta love that. So, like, from what I took away from your discussion about your trip to Italy is from our prior discussion and as well as today is you really like more of the small town atmosphere a lot better because people are very very warm and considerate.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they know you come from that town, you're like gold.
You're one of them, right?
Yes, yeah, you are. You are.
Oh, we got another question. I didn't see this question come up.
Yeah, I got one more just popped up.
Were the mayors of the commune usually from nobility? from what I researched from my family's hometown, that was kind of the case until like more recent history. But from like the records I obtained from, I'm trying to think, like I think it was like 1720 to the 1890s. Yeah, pretty much any family that held the title of mayor came from family that owned land, and they were titled Don, and or their families are listed on nobility, Napolitani, and or whatnot. So that's at least from what I've seen. But I wouldn't think that that's always necessarily the rule, especially once you get to larger towns, because there's merchants and more of a middle class in those type of areas.
Yeah, that's kind of been my experience too, and I think there weren't necessary elections back then too. If there was, a mayor of the town or something, they would have been appointed probably by a noble um, from maybe a lesser noble family, or like you said, a merchant or something like that. It was a very extremely closed society, from what I've read and from what I understand.
Yeah, yeah, same here. If you were like a merchant, you were appointed to the position, it's because you had connections with the nobleman that had the control of that particular fiefdom. So you were able to then get in good position.
Or you had money, because not, a lot of nobles that started getting watered down, and they didn't have money anymore. They had the title, they owned the town, but they didn't necessarily have a lot of money, so they started having to depend on these merchants.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That started really like becoming a thing in late 1700s, early 1800s.
I have one concern. I'd like to know what happened to all the jewelry, but other than that,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially the jewelry, out of all things to part with, because they're so like it's so personal. Because it's like it could be fit on to your person. You know what I mean? Like whether it's your necklace, a watch, um, a bracelet, a ring, earrings.
Oh, so one last thing before we go. I just need to mention this. If you want to purchase the book, let me just put that up there. It could be found on my site at www.italiangenealogy.blog, farmers and nobles, or it's on Amazon and Janaway. And special thanks to Sandra Skidmore from Janaway Publishing, who took the chance and published the book for me. So, and Phil's holding it up there.
I'm Vanna White right here, so.
Yeah. I don't see any other questions.
Oh, someone just said that they're gonna join the Facebook page, so that's a good thing.
And my sister said this.
Oh, especially your sister. I'm sure she would have loved it. Thank you all for coming out and enjoying your Sunday with us. Oh no, thank you for it. Thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it. Bob and I love to talk about these types of things.
Yeah, we could go probably another 3 hours, but we don't want to bore everybody to death. So, well, thanks, Phil. I appreciate you doing this.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Talk to you later.